Hey, I'm Jake, and welcome back to The Gallery. The Gallery is where we house weekly deep dives on all things startup studio related. Startup studios have grown at an incredible rate over the last 5 years especially, but there's a lot of chatter on the web about how strong the model is, the return profile, how to do it successfully, and so much more. So The Gallery is now here to be the ultra 401 level technical content source for all things startup studio GPs, LPs, entrepreneurs, and operators need to know. We do deep dives every week in the form of a podcast, blog, and newsletter. You can subscribe at thegallery.tv. And we also have daily short form content on all of our social media channels. So if you want daily content, but also weekly deep dives, we invite you to subscribe. Without further ado, let's dive into today's episode. So Healey Cypher, really excited to have you here today. You are the CEO at BoomPop, which is, from what I understand, a portfolio company of Atomic, and you're also the COO at Atomic. And for everyone who's listening, I'm sure you know of Atomic, you've heard of Atomic, you idolize Atomic. In my opinion, one of the top, most impressive studios in the world, has been around for a long time. Super excited to have you here today. Tell us about yourself.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we'd love to hear just how you got into this, how you got into the studio world, and how you got into starting a company. Just clear this all up for us, because there's a lot going on here.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess quick kind of personal background. I'm from Nebraska, which is a small state in the center of the country. It turns out most people probably haven't been to. I grew up in Saudi Arabia for 16 years, came back to the country, and then after a very short stint in consulting after doing undergrad at Penn in Philly, found my way into my first startup in 2010 in Palo Alto. And it was run by a guy named Jack. Jack, I met at Penn, and it was like hitting a lottery. Within 5 months, we were in acquisition conversations with eBay. 2 months later, we had sold. And it changed my life, Jake. I mean, to the point where I'm from a very blue-collar family in Nebraska. I went from having literally $34 in my bank account. That's not like an exaggeration. It was just $3-4 in my bank account. To I could get married because how old was I at that point?
Yeah.
I want to say it was 23, 24.
Okay.
Yeah. Just moved from New York.
Not bad for a 23, 24-year-old. $34 you can get.
Yeah, it wasn't negative. Yeah, that's a fair point. And I could get married because I could afford the wedding all of a sudden. So it was incredible. And I got kind of addicted then, Jake, to this idea of running and selling companies. And so I was at eBay for a while. I became the chief of staff for the CTO there, got to know the C-suite pretty well. John, who's now the CEO of Nike, the CEO then. Bob Swan, who's a CFO, then CEO of Intel, now is over at Andreessen. Anyway, the whole crew. And I started another company after that, sold it, and then sold the next company after that. And the last company I sold back in 2019 was an exceedingly boring company. If you ever walk into a McDonald's or a Burger King or a Wendy's, and you see one of those touchscreen kiosks where you order food, we did all those for the top 40 quick serve restaurants. And it was a great deal, man. You know, we sold it to Verifone. I can't talk a lot about the details. Suffice to say, it was a wonderful outcome. And I was trying to figure out what to do in life then. You know, do I move to like Oaxaca? I ate crickets for a while. Turns out I don't love crickets, or like get back into the thick of startup world. And one of the feelings that I had at the ending was that I knew how to do the thing. Like I knew how to raise VC money, and I knew how to hire a team, and I knew how to sell a company, but I didn't feel like I was in the center of Silicon Valley, like in the inner circle. And Jack and I had been chatting for a while. Obviously, he had sold his first company, Milo, and he had started Atomic. And we had talked on and off for years about what he was doing at Atomic, and I was just endlessly impressed from the outside. Jack is a truly prolific human in great ideas and capital raising and hiring great talent. Just one of the most impressive people that I know. And so finally he said, you know, come on, man, you just sold your company. Come join Atomic and help me to scale this thing. And so a little bit about Atomic, and then I'll tell you kind of what's happened since. So Atomic is a venture fund, typical LP-GP relationship. We have great LPs. I can't say who they are, of course, but like think blue chip of the blue chip have anchored our third and fourth funds. Yep. Today we sit at a little under 800 million AUM. We have our fourth fund we closed last year. And the interesting thing that kind of contrasts us with not only other venture firms, but other studios is we only invest in companies we start. And we consider ourselves not just kind of co-funders, but we're co-founders
Mhm.
with our founding teams.
Mhm.
And so when I came into Atomic, and I guess for some contrast, I came in and Atomic is run like a startup. When I joined, we had a team of I think 25 people. AUM was 250, and we had like 14 companies. Today we sit at a little under 800 million AUM, a team of 75, and a little over 40 companies. So we've done a lot of damage over the last 4 years. And I'll never forget the moment I started Atomic. I came in, Jake, and honestly, I had a little bit of hubris, like three-time founder. I knew how to exit. I thought I knew what was up. And I remember like coming in, and the whole team who was here kind of patted me on the back and was like, "Oh, that's really cute that you know how to do that." I had no idea. I mean, the shortcuts, the cheat codes that were available. That if you take a step back and you think about as a founder, let's say you're a really good serial entrepreneur, how many shots on goal do you really have to pitch a Series A company to really validate or invalidate, for that matter, a 0 to 1 idea? It's like, I don't know, 6 or 8 in your life, maybe maximum. And that's only if you haven't done that well. Like, if you do well, you kind of stop at a certain point. Atomic does that, I mean, multiple times a month. It's incredible. And so when I came in, I met this team. It was the best team I'd ever met in my life. Everyone was motivated and incredibly smart and ambitious, but also just very fun and pleasant.
Yeah.
And taught me things that the first month it was like humbling in the real way, not like when you say I'm humbled on LinkedIn for an award you got. Like I actually felt like humble. I was like, dude, I don't know shit.
Yeah.
And so Atomic is an incredible place. I'm happy to talk about the platform broadly and what it does. And then I guess to answer your first question, I came on and one of the really interesting things about Atomic that we always say internally is a feature, not a bug, is that if you're part of that 75-person Atomic team, if you fall in love with a concept, you can spend a big amount of time on it. And it's open options. You could say, hey, I want to do this forever, and this is my forever path. And that's what Andrew Dudum did at Hims&Hers, which obviously was fantastic. They went from a cold start to a $3 billion IPO, and not IPO, $3 billion public listing in 3 years, which is crazy.
Yep.
You could say, hey, I want to do this, but actually I only want to go from, as you mentioned earlier before the call, we're talking about, is it 0 to 1, 1 to 10, 10 to N? Maybe I just like 0 to 1. So I'm going to get it there, get product market fit, and then I'm going to hand this off to someone else and keep doing it again.
Yep.
Or you could say, I just want to stay fun side and I want to help you to allocate capital. Like all those things are possible within Atomic, which is the wonderful thing. And so BoomPop started from a place of personal need. I guess an overview of BoomPop is we're trying to make it as easy to plan events, offsites, and corporate meetings as buying items on e-com. It sounds obvious as I say it out loud. You would be mind blown if you went. You plan events, Jake. Like it's wild when you figure out you can't book over 10 hotel rooms online. You got to call them or email like a director of revenue management, and it's just this crazy laborious process and a largely overlooked industry. Like if you think about corporate travel, a third of it is meetings and events. And half of that, so about $150 billion a year, is these simple meetings, which is just 6 to 50 people getting together. There's no service, no software that addresses that. And the need has never been bigger in history because of distributed work. So I am CEO of BoomPop. I spent a decent amount of time there. I'm also COO and on the investment committee for Atomic. I spent a decent amount of time there. I'm also a dad of 2 amazing kids, Theo and Lily, wife to Rachel, a professor who is just my life partner, who I love dearly. And so, and I try to work out. So like the biggest thing is I'm just not sleeping enough, if I'm being honest. It's like averaging 4.5, 5 hours a night, which I got to work on.
I'm sorry, a founder who doesn't sleep enough. I'm not sure I've heard that before.
Yeah. I know. Woe is me.
So just for some kind of historical context, because I want to share for the audience how this has fit in with the broader historical overview of studios and their proliferation over the last decade or so. What year did you get involved with Atomic? What years did you decide to then go build one of the portfolio companies? Kind of walk us through the history of it.
Yeah, I joined in 2019, late 19. Jack started Atomic officially in 2011. And Jack pioneered this kind of most recent version of the studio model, no question.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of different flavors, and maybe it's worth even talking about that for a moment, which is, I think Atomic has nailed it. I think combining a venture fund with venture returns with a full studio offering is there's actually a trio to it, but is a golden ticket. And a lot of studios will say, hey, give me a bunch of equity and I'm just going to help you.
Mhm.
But it's still on you to do whatever the rest of the equation is. And I've generally found those to be overpriced and underuseful. Like as a founder, uh, I don't think you should go do that,
Mhm.
broadly speaking. And if you do it by mass exception and reference call the shit out of all of them and talk to all their founders and make sure it makes sense. Because, and this is one of the things to note about studios, like why do studios exist in the first place? It's because in the venture stack, studios have the first shot. Like we come in at the lowest possible cost. And if it's only preferred, it's usually like at the pre-seed. And if it's also common, it's at par value, which is four zeros and a one. And so you have all these upsides. You get QSBS, you get common ownership, you get insane IRR because it gooses the return. Like all these things happen. But specifically, what it means is you're never competing on deal flow. So unlike a Series A plus investor, where your life is just the quality of the deals that come across your desk or whatever your Zoom at this point, um, our lifeblood is the quality of the ideas we work on and the quality of the founders we co-found with. That's what we optimize for. And so when this becomes especially important is like right now, the broad thinking, the broad kind of whatever wisdom knowledge is that when the Fed hikes an interest rate by 1%, ARR multiples go down by 10 to 15%. Well, they're up at 5.25 now or whatever it is. So multiples are down. Like everything is down 40 to 60%. And why that matters is the trickle down happens. IPOs aren't happening. So then late stage investors don't have anything to do. So they're sitting on it. That trickles down to Series A, where all of a sudden they're saying, well, we need to see that you are an exceptional company. And so seed is a war zone right now. Like if you look across venture, the late stage is crickets. Yes, Instacart went public. Yes, there's a couple things that are, Cisco just bought Splunk. That's great. And it was for Logan at Redpoint called it like it was for a bigger valuation even he thought. So there's good stuff. Early indicators are about to get back to the way it was. But for the most part, seed is a war zone because everyone's going, the only way my venture returns make sense is if my cost basis is like as close to zero as possible. And one of the things that I think about a ton is uh, is broadly like if you just take a step back and think about venture returns at all, like venture patterns. And this is from Bill Gurley, who I think is pretty admirably wise on venture patterns over the course of a few decades or so. You think of a risk on risk off cycle as kind of like a sinus curve, but in fact it's not. It's more like a sawtooth comb. It's a 10-year long rise up and then a sharp drop. 10-year long rise up and then a sharp drop. And if you broadly look at all the times in history that anyone, any fund, any GP has made all of their returns, it is always at the beginning of the long up and they sell right before the peak. That's how you do it. That's why there's all these reasons why that kind of is true. And so I think people know that now. You have a bunch of investors out there that have never lived through a down cycle. So they're terrified. So they're going, okay, well, deals are bad, IR is bad. What am I going to do? I have to go all the way to the source. And this is me being a little mean, I think unless you are a VC who has operated recently, not even in the last 20 years, like no longer you're just a VC now, you don't know shit about operating a company. Like you actually don't have any idea what you're talking about. And so as a result, they're getting close and they're trying to kind of compete in this pre-seed market because that's where you're going to make all the returns and everyone knows it right now. And so they're starting up studios and you're seeing left and right. I think also it's very easy as someone who has had a couple shots on goal as a serial entrepreneur but no big exits to brand yourself as a successful entrepreneur and give advice. Advice is much easier to give than operating and executing. So anyway, I don't want to get too disparaging here, but my point is just be really wise about, thinking about what studios you're going to work with. And of course, happy to share more landscape thoughts there.
Yeah, I have a pretty specific question on that front. It's actually one that's, I know it's been on a lot of people's mind lately, especially including my own, which is you've got this huge long tail of new studios popping up. Everyone and their mother wants to launch a new studio for a few reasons. Been lots of big wins and big headlines. It's sexy. It's fun. It's cool returns. It's the new hot thing. They're not going to miss out on the asset class, whatever it is. And for lack of a better word, a lot of them, I mean, maybe the vast majority, even in my opinion, are predatory or are not ideal for the founders. How does that make you feel, having been in this game for a while, or even just the broader team at Atomic, having been in this game for a while, found a model that is not predatory, that does work, that does get results,
Mm-hmm.
yet
Mm-hmm.
you've got all these newcomers judging the broader asset class, which you're a leader in, as being potentially predatory and challenging?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple things to unpack there, and I'll try to kind of broadly do it one by one. So I think the first thing is, if a studio isn't priced right, there's no long-term success of that studio. And yes, you could tell me, you could quote whatever Prince by Machiavelli, like fine. But my point is, like, broadly speaking, it's just not going to work, because it turns out everyone who's any is worth their salt in venture or startups knows any company is as good as the people who are in it, and any venture portfolio is as good as the quality of the CEOs running the portfolio companies.
Mm-hmm.
Full stop. And so if you hose them, they'll tell everyone they know, and no one will ever work with you again. So I think those that are choosing that relatively myopic viewpoint to be predatory up front as you're standing up a studio have a very limited lifespan. And honestly, I'm not worried about them in the long term. In the short term, I'm worried that they will dupe people. And so I want to talk about that also.
Yeah.
The second thing is, it's also worth asking, what is the profile of founder or co-founder who is attracted to a studio model, and what type of studio? And I think you kind of mentioned it out of the gates, Jake, which is, if you are someone who's always been a bit on the outside, who's seen this as a black box, hasn't seen a career into entrepreneurship, studios can be very alluring because it's a very seductive proposition. Hey, I know investors, I can help you out. I'll tell you how to do it. Here's the sheet codes. Here's the kind of the rubric for this, and I'll make sure you don't, whatever, make the same mistakes and learn from me. But what they're also doing, and you said this exactly right, is they're preying on your naivete, which specifically means you don't really understand, probably as a founder, how board control and governance works. You don't understand what dual class stock mean. You don't understand that dilution is going to hose you over time. And so a founding cap table, if they are giving you 10% of the founding cap table, it's still a fucking shitty deal. Like, you don't get that. It sounds good. You don't really understand. And then once you've done it and you kind of figure it out a few years in, it's too late. You've already invested 3 of the most valuable years of your life working for someone else. And then you have very hard decisions to make. Also, one thing I'll just say, this is important to note, is a studio that comes out of the gates with an overly aggressive studio favored ownership structure is destroying many, many things. Not just operating incentives. They're destroying their ability to raise the next round, because other great venture firms won't do it. Yeah. They're going to go, this cap table is upside down. And in fact, I won't even work with another investor that has been that predatory or that unethical. They would set this up. So it's also important to note, if you come in as a potential founder who wants to work with the studio, and the pricing seems off, like, one, do your research, do your background checks, but know that it's not just, I'll negotiate, I'll deal with it later. Like, it doesn't work that way. Yeah. And there's big, big downsides in having to correct it on a good thing later. And people tend to get greedy later too. So I'm trying to not speak in over specifics. I mean, I guess it's a long way of saying that I've always prided myself for trying to be a pretty good person, which I know is a very subjective thing, but I try to do the right thing when no one's looking. I have my son who's 3, Theo, I mentioned this, and every time I make a decision, I ask myself very simply, would Theo be proud of his dad if he found out the decision I made? Yeah. Gosh, what a wonderfully clarifying North Star.
Sure.
And I think no place is perfect. Atomic isn't perfect. But I will tell you, on the scale of other studios, Atomic would not have the success we have. We would not work with the founders we work with if we were not priced right. And we are building for the long term. Yeah. Our hope as Atomic is a hallowed brand decades from now.
Yeah. I mean, on that note of the bigger theme here, why do you think so many people in venture, whether they're VCs or founders, are so attracted to, or even just allured by, the studio model right now? What's going on?
I think it's 3 things. I think it's, what I mentioned earlier, which is they want to be front of the stack. They have the lowest cost of ownership, and they do the math and they realize that you start 10 companies, 1 wins, and it's a moderate success at that point can return your fund versus having to have a massive success at a later point to return your fund. So there's economics. I think the second is, it is hard being a board member. you are always the bridesmaid, never the bride. And so they probably have an itch to getting back into operating, especially if they've been an operator, they kind of, they want to do it. Um, and then the third is it does scratch some ADD, like if you are thinking about all this stuff all the time as an investor, you kind of see all these patterns for what could work well and these opportunities to make good companies. And so you say, well, gosh, I could do a lot of stuff and it'd be really fun and kind of find people to do the hard nitty gritty operating stuff.
Yeah. I
So I
remember
think those are the three reasons.
I remember I joined a studio as the VP of branding right out of college. I don't know if you knew that. That's where I kind of
I didn't know that.
my studio. I don't know, it opened my
Studio
eyes.
Stripes.
Yeah, it was 2017, and I had never heard of a studio. I didn't know the first thing about venture capital, and no one had really heard of studios at the time. I think
Yeah.
Dollar Shave had like just exited or was about to. It was like the beginning of the era of studios.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the CEO of my studio was this guy, Jesse Lawrence. And the way he framed it, which always stuck with me, which is like why he did it and why I stuck with it and why so many other, I think, studio GPs get into it, is he was like, he'd call himself almost like an honest mad scientist and
Hmm.
just loved to tinker all day. It was like,
Yeah.
well, what a cool and enjoyable career if you have a fund and a vehicle and the ability to just like tinker on ideas all day and then have a whole system and a framework and a factory like process and a team to go turn those into real solutions and like kill 99% of them, but still just your day is tinkering on new ideas and new things. It's pretty fun if you like wearing the hat of investor, but you also like wearing the hat of entrepreneur,
I'm inventor. It's
inventor.
super fun. And yeah, inventor. Yeah. 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 And my only kind of, so like he's totally right, and it is a dream job. And look, ideas really do matter. One of the stories that Jack tells all the time at Atomic is, Travis at Uber, before Uber, he and the entire team were working on an idea that was going nowhere very fast. But he then kind of assumed responsibility for Uber, and that same team turned it around and just became the smashing success it was. And yeah, of course, there's bumps along the way. So ideas really, really do matter. And I think that is where studios can help. Like there's a ton of ways you can, validate or invalidate distribution up front and de-risk it. There's tons of ways you can de-risk a bunch of stuff up front. And that is important to know that is a possibility. With very little capital and energy, you can get a sense if it's a true positive or true negative. But I'd also say that the execution is so freaking important. I mean, if you ask a CEO, what are the top three things their team needs to do? Execute, execute, execute. Like
Yeah.
that's it. The strategy is of course important, but you got to execute on the strategy. And so, you know, um, I tend to trust studios that have a mix. A team that has a very good validation research crew, but also a bunch of folks who can just help you get it done super, super well.
Yep. So let's shift gears slightly. For the entrepreneurs that are listening, and
Yeah.
also for the new studios that are listening, who are thinking about both of that, which are thinking about what's it like to build a startup at Atomic as an entrepreneur. Can you walk us through what that journey is like, whether it's through a story or the actual framework? And then I've got a follow up question to that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, of course, I'll tell you some anecdotes, and one of the things at Atomic we pride ourselves in is we want to. We don't see the studio environment as a zero sum game. We're not like we don't try to. We want everyone to be successful. We cheer everyone along on something, but we also don't share our playbook. That's kind of like the delicate dance that I'll try to
Sure.
maintain here. I will tell you that there's one currency above all at Atomic, and that's time. The faster you do something, the better. And so one of the things that we do is we celebrate sunsets. That's something important to know.
Mhm.
If you have an idea that didn't work and you spent not a lot of money and very few months on it, massive success in our books. And as a founder who works with us, we encourage you to find true negatives quickly. We celebrate it. We say, hey, great job. Take 2 weeks off. Let's do it again. Now, that is a surefire way of guaranteeing you will have quality founders working on quality problems to solve
Yeah.
versus getting trapped. As many founders can probably test, sometimes you just get trapped for 5 to 7 years in a company and like you can't get out. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Until you figure out an exit plan. So what it's like, I'll tell you 3 stories. So it is incredibly fast. I remember I was sitting with Jack he and I were in his office just doinking around, and on a Thursday, we had this idea, and they said, "Hey, like, should we go do this?" He's like, "Let's try it." Okay, this is not an exaggeration. Within 24 hours, we had set up a legal entity and started the company and distributed things. Within 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks after that moment, I had built a website. I had visited 16 factories, selected the product, bought the product, had it in the DC, had the packaging done, had the brand built, had pre-tested all the marketing channels, dialed in the one that I wanted, and I launched a brand new company in 2.5 weeks. And the very first week, we hit a 1.3 million ARR rate. 2.5 weeks.
Yeah.
That is unheard of. Like, I didn't know that was possible before joining Atomic. So that's one story, which is it's fast. And of course, the question becomes, oh, how did you do that? Well, it's because we have this incredible internal team that does anything and everything you could possibly need. Is it performance marketing? Is it design? Is it legal? Is it IT? Is it HR? Is it engineering? You name it. They're there. They're around. They're fast. They're fun. They get it done. They work so well together. And we also have this incredibly valuable centralized knowledge base. I mean, here's patterns. Here's the top 16 business models to consider. Like, oh my God, how useful is that just to look through it? Here are thresholds for what's good or not based on channel, based on timing, based on business cases. Here's how to de-risk distribution on the B2B front. Here's how to de-risk it on the D2C front. Like it's the whole, here's every pitch deck our companies have ever done, every investment memo that's worked or not. Like it's this incredible place to accelerate learning. So that's one story. The second is actually, I'll even tell a story about BoomPop, which is kind of fun. So BoomPop started off as a completely different idea. And we've been kind of a heat-seeking missile to product market fit, I'd say. So initially, BoomPop started out, and this is actually, I don't think anyone knows, it's kind of fun. No one knows the actual origin. BoomPop started out as a company called Active Labs, which the thesis was instructors make studios that make instructors, like you have fitness instructors. So we're going to create the world's best online studio to connect instructors directly with their students, especially in a virtual age. They can do classes online. It'll be great. And we thought it'd be a near zero CAC for the demand side because the instructors all have their students who are they're kind of like their fans. So we started this company. And by the way, to start the company, like it's just you talk to Riley and the design team and the website's going. And you talk to the product crew and like all of a sudden they're building this stuff out. And you talk to your biz ops squad and start reaching out and finding studios. You talk to StratFin and they start building up the business model, why it would work. Like it starts going. You're doing it, but it's just going. Everyone knows how to do it. They don't need they all know the assignment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then as we do our first soft launch, we find that it turns out instructors, in fact, don't have the information of any of their students because that's Equinox property or whatever. And so we can't do it. So we start, okay, we're good at performance marketing. So we start marketing individual events throughout the week to get people to join the classes. That fails miserably because, of course, what happens is it's impossible for the marketing to learn quickly enough. And so 2 people show up to a new class and it's like being a core power yoga by yourself. It's like, where's everyone? It's awful, awkward, no money. And so we then go to StratFin and say, well, how do we fix this? Well, we decided we need to change the nature of the inventory, make it more binary. People buy out a whole class versus individual seats. Then the monkey's on their back to fill it up. Well, who would pay for that higher ticket price? Well, friends and family. We did research. Don't have the ability to pay. Affinity groups. No, they have their own thing. Shit. Companies. They got a ton of dough and they want to bring people together. So we flip it to hosted virtual events, a marketplace for hosted virtual events you buy out. We launched Boombox. Now it's the second brand. Kills it. First year we end with 2,500 corporate logos, 60,000 people together, did over $6 million first year. Yeah. And then we turn the corner to 22. And again, our customers go, hey, virtual is fine, but what we really want to do is we have this other problem we want you to solve, which is we need to get our teams together, but we ditched our office space. We're also, by the way, not going to have all of our team who's moved to like Idaho and Nebraska come back to work in this expensive place. So can you help us to bring people together physically on a regular cadence, both our clients and our team? And we said, NFW, like we're not a travel company, but it turned out massive overlooked space. And we did the research with Atomic again. And it was like, wow, this checks every box. Like unit economics are amazing. Market size is great. growth is seeming really good. There's all these things I could go through. Overlook space, competitive landscapes weak. Like, let's do it. And so that's what it's like to be at Atomic. Is you start to hone in that skill of really seeing what's good and what's not good.
Yeah.
And then the third thing, and this is kind of a fun one, is we also like to make it fun for the internal crew, and so we have these moments where we bring the whole Atomic crew together, and all we do together is see how many amazing companies can we build in the shortest time possible. And those are really, really fun. And obviously, I can't share a ton of details there, but it's so fun to call them build sprints, and some really big companies are going to come out of that. So anyway, that's what it's like to work at Atomic. I don't know if that gives you enough.
Yeah, it's great. It's the speed. I mean, look, at the end of the day, anyone who's listening here in the studio world recognizes, like, you need a playbook. You need almost like your departments, and it's an assembly line, right? The product starts here, it moves to that department, it gets back on the assembly line. It goes to the next department, it's built a bit more, it goes back on the assembly line. And that's building your startup, getting it out as fast as possible. Did you, in the early days...
Actually, Jake, can I add one thing to that real quick?
Please do.
So I actually don't know that it's totally the assembly line that you think it is.
Okay.
I think it actually is more about being openly in the people business and knowing that if you find amazing people and you incentivize them well and you let them loose, they will do the right thing and the best thing possible. And one of the things I remember, I came in and a partner here said, Healey, I'm a pretty, me, Jay, I'm pretty OCD. Like, everything has a place, every place is a thing type of thing, like everything's organized, cords are in little buckets and places. Sure. So many organizing bags. But he said, you have to understand that it's important not to mistake chaos for inefficiency sometimes. Mm-hmm. It was really hard for me to grok. But then as I kind of got to Atomic, I realized that is part of it. Is, yes, you have these like known truths and thresholds and playbooks, but sometimes you just have the right people in the right seat and they figure it out too.
Yep. Is there a huge element then of building out equity and incentive for core Atomic members very diligently so that they all feel the upside in every portfolio company long term?
So this is one of those things I can't share how we do it. I can tell you we think a lot about that, and I think we are very unique. Yeah. Actually, I know for a fact we're very unique in that.
Sure.
The pithy answer is yes. It is very, very important to know that incentives drive action.
Yeah. So if you're an entrepreneur, and let's focus on the one that you alluded to a bit before, which is you may not be super aware of all the nuances of the really challenging and difficult sides of building a startup. Yeah. How do you think those founders can discern if this studio or that studio or this studio is a good one, or I don't want to use the word scam, but like one that might be a little more predatory to them?
Well, I mean, it's so funny. I was just coaching a friend on this too. He was like, "Hey, I'll tell you a story. Yeah. I just got this, I want to try my hand at being a CEO. I got an offer from a studio." I said, "Great. What's the offer?" 10% ownership. And what was it? This cash base and there's some other thing. And I said, okay, well, I have some questions. Like, how much money is already in the business? 0. I was like, how big's a team? 0. Jake, that's a scam.
Yeah. I mean, 90%.
That's a fucking scam.
What?
For what, man? Like, you have an idea? No way. I mean, in this case, he said, well, there's some corporate stuff lined up for some big deals. That sounds like hope to me. Like, I don't believe it. And so, like, that's like, there you go. That's a formula for a scam right there. Like that's what it looks like.
Sure.
You need to think about ask them questions like, how does this compare to market? If you look at a typical Series A distribution of a cap table, which by the way, you can look up right now, you can find it. How will this look by then? And how does it compare and contrast? And if they lie to you, well, you know that something's wrong. And then you could say, wonderful. Let's say that it's a lot less favorable to me as the operator or the operating team and more favorable to you. So how do you compensate for that? How is your pricing right? So what is the percentage of your initial ideas that get past Series A that exit? And it's got to be, by the way, the index has to be significantly higher, more success for you to accept that lower ownership. And if they, by the way, make the pitch to you that, oh, well, if it's a big enough pie, everyone wins and you'll win. Great. Well, that's a reverse pitch. You take the small slice. I'll take 90%. I'm doing the work. So like that's my um, that's my important point. I think also like, are you buying in at founder stock or are you getting options? It's a really big difference there. Options, by the way, like are the only tool you have after a certain point beyond the kind of RSU nonsense, which is important at some point, but not early on. You know, options are not founding stock.
Yeah.
It's they can maybe get QSBS, but it's hard. Do you have early exercise? Yes or no? Are you having to take a partial recourse loan to make those options become real? What's the tail for exercising? Do you have double or single trigger acceleration? Like for example, if a studio is telling you to come on and they don't they should give you single, but at least double trigger acceleration on your options. They don't know what they're doing. It doesn't matter to them. That's the beginning of your negotiation point with a new owner if you have a change of control later. So there's all these little things that you can pick up on. Ask them, who are the GPs at what funds that you trust the most, you've done the most deals with? What's your experience here? Who are founder references? Like really push them on the value, because at the end of the day, if you're coming in, and I'm talking as a founder, like you have simple jobs, hire an amazing team, keep the company capitalized, and make sure your strategy is right. Like it's almost that simple.
Yeah.
And so if they are putting all that onus on you, they're not going to help you on any one of those three, then I'm not exactly sure what you need them for. And if it's the idea, I would just argue, as we've just gone through, that like, yes, sometimes you can nail the idea out of the gates and you crushed it. A lot of times you didn't, and you need to pivot, and that's all on your shoulders. It's not the initial idea.
Yep. So we've got about 3 minutes left. In that
Okay.
time, I've one big question. See how if you can give this like a rapid fire
Okay.
answer to a big question. Thinking about the broader startup studio landscape, that includes lots of studios, lots of conversation about studios, lots of entrepreneurs, lots of corporates, lots of investors, lots of LPs, etc. What do you think needs to change in the next 2 years?
For, I guess, to change in order for what? To be better for founders, to have the studio model continue to work? Like what, or what do I just not like and I want it to be different?
Let's start there. What do you not like
Okay.
and want to be different?
um, I think you're going to see 90% of studios die. And it's a good thing because they didn't have a place in the first place. They're going to die because they were greedy. They couldn't get good talent. They didn't provide value. And people are going to wise up and they're not going to want to work with them. I think that's great. I think that's fine, actually. I think that's just part of, natural selection or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
I also really hope what changes is the macro environment gets a little more favorable towards later stage companies, and as a result, the venture market opens up. And I think what that will do is it will allow people to start focusing their gaze on later stage stuff versus
Yep.
everyone crowding the earlier stage because there's nothing else to do right now. There's no deals. Like GPs are being told go take 6 months vacation. We're not doing any deals.
Sure. Healey, thank you so much for being here. This was
Of
awesome.
course, Jake. Hopefully
For
this is
people,
this is a lot of fun. Hopefully you enjoyed it.
100%. For folks that are listening, what would be a call to action you want to share with them, whether it's about BoomPop or yourself or with Atomic? And then how can people get in touch with you, should you want them to?
Yeah. Thanks, man. If you are an aspiring founder and you are interested in working with a studio, reach out to me, Healey at atomic.vc, Healey at atomic.vc, Victor Charlie. We do have a ton of applicants all the time for FIRs, but I will tell you kind of honestly what I think about what you're doing, and if it could be a good fit. We have an awesome talent team. I can direct you to them. If you are considering a studio offer right now and you want advice, pay me. I'll tell you immediately if it sucks. Happy to do that. And then, for BoomPop, if you are a company that realizes it's important to get your team together in a regular cadence, which of course it does, and your clients together, and you're finding you're spending a lot of time wasting, money, wasting time, not having a great UX, we'd love to help. Healey at boompop.com. We've got a little over 5,000 corporate logos now. And on average, this is the big thing, is our models like Airbnb, we make services fees on both sides, both suppliers and demand. We found that our average client is making a 5 to 10x return in savings on the services fee they pay for us, because we have gotten our negotiation down with suppliers to just an absolute art.
Nice.
And you'd be amazed by how much you can get.
Love it. Well, thank you, my friend. And
Thanks, Jake.